a wolf in sheep's clothing. The Roman poet Decimus Junius Juvenal once said, "There is scarcely a litigation in which the cause of the quarrel is not a woman. Times change, but morals remain the same, and not everyone may agree, but whatever happens, a lot of it comes down to the female gender. Often behind every twisted story is a woman." In the fall of 2001, another gruesome event rocked Oklahoma City. The city is in the heart of a deeply religious belt. The so-called Bible Belt of the United States is known as a hotbed of religious and conservative values. At the same time, this part of America is known for its high rates of crime, divorce, and teen pregnancy. The cold-blooded crime that occurred in Andrew's family, saddening and outraging the faith community, added to the unfortunate list. No breaks. One rainy October morning, a strange phone call rang in the office of Robert Andrew, senior vice president of a well-known advertising company. The man on the other end of the phone identified himself as a doctor at a local hospital. The unidentified man reported that Brenda, Mr. Andrew's wife, was in critical condition. In a panic, Rob rushed to his car, started the engine, and headed for the clinic. On the way, he noticed that when he pressed the brake pedal, the vehicle would not stop. After running a red traffic light, he successfully pulled over to the side of the road. The car stopped. Miraculously surviving, he called a cab. When he got to the hospital, he learned that his wife was not a patient. When Rob took the car to a repair shop, the technician told him that the brake hoses had been cut. The unfortunate man was speechless with surprise. Someone had obviously wanted to take his life and had come up with a good reason to drive the car. But who was capable of such an act? Putting all the details together, Rob headed to the police station. He informed law enforcement officials that someone had tried to take his life, and apparently, he had a pretty good idea who it was. The inseparable couple. Robert and Brenda were married for about 17 years. The couple had 2 beautiful children during their marriage. The couple were very religious, so they raised their children in faith and morals. Together they attended church, were engaged in charity. To the average person, their union seemed happy and reliable. However, in October 2001, their family ship went down. Mrs. Andrew left her husband and filed for divorce. Good girl Brenda. Brenda Evers was born on December 16, 1963 in Enid, Oklahoma. The girl's parents were devout Christians. They gathered around the table for meals together, held group prayers, and attended the parish. Brenda grew up a quiet and peaceful child. She did well in school. She spent most of her time at church helping others. When many of her peers were dating guys, she waited for the one and only for life. In high school, the girl was a cheerleader for the soccer team. She was very fond of dancing, but never participated in parties. In general, in her younger years, Brenda was a model of piety and modesty, like her mother. By the way, she wanted to be like her mother in everything. Therefore, after marriage, she intended to become a housewife and devote herself to her husband and children. First, love. At the age of 17, the girl met Rob Andrew, the older brother of her friend. He was older and studied at one of the state universities. Young people began to communicate. It turned out that they had a lot in common, despite the fact that the guy was a Baptist and Brenda was a Lutheran. The two of them had conservative views on life, attended church, and dreamed of creating a large and friendly family, so the friendly relationship grew into a romantic one. After a while, the girl entered college in Winfield, Kansas. Despite the distance of 125 miles between them, the couple actively kept in touch. Eventually, to be closer to her lover, a year later Brenda transferred to a university in Ohio in Stillwater. Close to the summer of 1984, the lovers became husband and wife, metamorphosis. Soon, Robert received a tempting job offer in Houston, Texas. The man doubted the decision, but Brenda convinced her spouse. While he was building a career as an advertising manager, she managed to get a degree and get a job in banking. Mrs. Andrew fell in love with the tall buildings of the city, nightclubs, and busy life. Texas changed the young woman. She got rid of her excessive modesty. She began to take care of herself, wear fashionable clothes, makeup, made a large circle of friends. Her husband was not very pleased with his wife's transformation. He thought that a believing woman should be more restrained. Besides, Rob was homesick. Therefore, when he was offered to return to the advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he gladly agreed. However, Brenda did not support her spouse. They even quarreled on this ground. Then still came to a compromise. The couple agreed that Robert will settle in a new place and find a suitable house. And if everything works out well, the wife will join him. A few months they lived separately from each other. Subsequently, the family was reunited. In the early 1990s, the Andrew couple settled in a luxurious house in the prestigious neighborhood of Landsbrook, and 9 months later they had a daughter, Tricity. Brenda even quit her job to become a housewife and engage in child rearing. 4 years later came son Parker. It seemed that there came a family idyll. For this, they had everything: love, children, home, and financial prosperity. What happened in Mrs. Andrews' garage? On November 20th, 2001, a few days before Thanksgiving, Rob planned to stop by Brenda's house. He had made arrangements with her in advance to take the children with him for the holidays. At the time, the couple was divorced. In the evening, his ex-wife met him on the doorstep of the house. She asked the man to go to the garage and help with the faulty equipment. When he bent down, he heard footsteps behind him. Robert turned toward the noise. A gunshot rang out and the wounded man fell to the concrete floor. Around 6 p.m., the emergency services received a call. The caller turned out to be Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance immediately rushed to the scene. When the paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene. In the garage, in a pool of blood, lay a man whose cause of death was a gunshot wound. His wife was luckier, shot in the arm. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and the woman herself looked remarkably detached. The paramedic put her condition down to shock. "I tried to give Rob first aid, but I think he's dead," she reported. The victim's hand was bandaged, and she was later taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left the scene, police began their examination. The first thing they found was a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall. A little while later, a shotgun shell casing was found, so multiple weapons were used in the attack. The second thing the officers noticed was the victim's wallet. He still had it on him, so the shooting wasn't connected to a robbery. To understand what happened, it was necessary to interview Mr. Andrews' ex-wife. At the clinic, Brenda explained the reason for their meeting. She also explained that while they were busy, 2 masked armed men entered the garage. The thugs shouted something in their direction, but what exactly she couldn't hear. One of them then shot Rob twice, and the other wounded her as she was about to flee. After that, the attackers hurriedly fled. Who the attackers were and what they had come for was not known to her. However, the victim added that Robert could hardly have enemies, as he was a decent and kind person, always helping other people. The woman admitted that she was frightened by what happened, especially the fact that there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, many things in her words were contradictory. It was clear to the police that Brenda was not telling the truth, especially the fact that the children were not packed for the trip. Interviews with neighbors yielded no positive results. None of them had noticed anything strange that fateful evening. Hoping to find out the details of Brenda and Robert's personal life, the detectives decided to question the couple's acquaintances. Midlife crisis. It turns out that after the birth of their second child, the relationship between the couple became strained. Mr. Andrew repeatedly told friends and pastor that Brenda was abusive to him, and repeatedly stated that she hated their marriage. Ronnie Stump, a friend of Robert's who was a frequent visitor to the bereaved family, said he thought their feelings were abnormal. Brenda was not shy about her expressions even in the presence of strangers, and Rob clearly loved the woman more than she deserved, as he forgave her antics for quite a long time. Friends of the family unanimously claimed that she had undergone a strange metamorphosis. From an ordinary housewife, she turned into a woman of easy behavior. These accusations were not unfounded. There was a lot of evidence to support them. Brenda was clearly going through a midlife crisis. Her style of dress had changed. The once sophisticated woman began to dress vulgarly and brightly painted. But it didn't stop there. Mrs. Andrew became very secretive to her husband. She did not tell him where and with whom she spent time, what she was doing. Soon, Robert became aware of his wife's affairs on the side. In October 1997, she began a relationship with Rick Nunley, the husband of a friend. The man was Brenda's co-worker while working at an Oklahoma bank. The couple dated for a year, and afterward had an occasional phone relationship. Later, another lover was local store owner James Higgins. At first, he was only impressed by the frank outfits and flirting, and after, from the hands of Brenda, received the keys to the hotel. The man went about skillful seductress and met with her 1-2 times a week. This affair lasted about 5 years. All this time, Rob remained in complete ignorance. However, he realized that their marriage is cracking at the seams. In addition, his wife practically stopped talking to him and spending time. He hoped that everything will eventually get better and tried with all his might to keep the family. In 2001, Brenda stopped the relationship with Higgins, but not for the sake of her husband and the holy bonds of marriage. She was sinking more and more into the abyss of debauchery and vice. Fatal love. 2 years earlier, a Baptist church had sprung up in Oklahoma City, largely due to Mr. Andrews' contributions. In it, the man became a deacon, and his wife took the position of Sunday school teacher. From the outside, their family looked prosperous, adhering to morals and traditions. At that time, Brenda had not completely lost the image of a model wife. She gladly taught the children the basics of religion and fellowship. There, she met James Pavatt, a new lover. He was also a part-time school teacher, married and generally religious, and was friends with Rob. However, he too could not resist the charms and dazzling smile of Brenda. In the spring of 2001, they began to meet. At first, they did it secretly, but then, having lost the limits of prudence, they stopped hiding their feelings. Everyone in the church saw their sympathy for each other. Rob suspected his wife of infidelity and had a big fight with her. They separated. Just by this time, James had divorced his wife. Rob still dreamed of restoring the family, but Brenda was adamant and even filed for divorce. Just after this event, there was a strange call to Mr. Andrews' office, and then a shocking car malfunction. In making an attempt on his life, Rob suspected the sweet couple, which he reported to the police. What could have caused such thoughts in an open and ingenuous man? The same question was asked by law enforcement officials. Rob did not prevent the divorce. The agreement on children was reached. He helped Brenda financially. What else was there not to please a cheating husband? It was all about the money. In addition to teaching school, James Pavatt was an insurance agent. In the summer of that year, he took out an $800,000 insurance policy on Mr. Andrew. Brenda was the sole beneficiary. It's about the insurance. When officers began investigating the bizarre attack on Mr. Andrews' family, in addition to the relationship between the couple, they also became aware of the incident involving the car's brakes. Detectives compared the facts. Brenda's involvement in the murder of her husband became clearer. In addition, there was a new suspect in the case, her newfound lover. Then investigators learned that 2 weeks before the incident in the garage, Rob Andrew paid a visit to the insurance company. He wanted to exclude his unfaithful wife from his insurance policy. However, James refused to do so, citing that the contents of the contract could only be changed by the beneficiary himself, that is, Brenda Andrew. Not taking his former friend's word for it, Rob decided to verify the information with management. It turned out that Brenda and James had attempted to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Mrs. Andrew. Rob's signature was falsified, plus it was dated retroactively. Mr. Andrew was assured by Pavatt's superiors that he still owned the policy, and only the policyholder could change the terms of the contract. When James learned of the incident, he was very angry, as the circumstances discovered were the reason for his dismissal. Investigation. Officers also became aware that Robert was in possession of a 16-gauge shotgun. When Rob was moving out of the house, Brenda did not give him the weapon. During a search of Andrew's home, the shotgun was strangely not found. Meanwhile, an inspection at Gigstad's neighbor's house yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun they were looking for was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic of the Gigstad family home. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home. No signs of forced entry were established. Mrs. Gigstad admitted that the spare key to their home was in Brenda Andrews' possession. Another piece of evidence came from Joanna Larson, Pavatt's daughter. On the day of the crime, the girl lent her father her car. He promised to get it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, the daughter realized that he did not fix it. In addition, Joanna found a strange find on the car mat, a bullet of .22 caliber. To top it all off, the girl admitted that her father told her to throw it away when she informed him about it. Investigators also discovered that James had purchased a handgun the week before the attack. Consequently, detectives planned to question the sweet couple. The last ride. On November 23rd, Robert Andrews' funeral was held. This crime raised many questions among family and friends. However, even more perplexity arose when Brenda and her children did not appear at the ceremony. Also, James Pavatt did not show up to say goodbye to his friend. No one present knew where they were. This worried not only Robert's relatives, but also the police. It became obvious that the no-shows had gone on the run. Apparently, they guessed that the officers were on the trail of the perpetrators. The suspects were identified. By then, the autopsy results had come back. Brenda's description of the attack differed significantly from the forensic report. As the police had suspected, 2 different weapons were used in the attack. Robert and Brenda were wounded differently than the dead man's wife described. The first shot at the man was indeed fired from a shotgun at long range, but the second came at close range from a .22 caliber pistol. Brenda's arm itself was also shot at close range with the same gun. By analyzing the bloodstains found and their location on the fabric, it was clear that the spouse was in the vicinity of the husband when he was shot. The angle of the blood matches where the shooter was. That is, it was Brenda who fired the second shot at the wounded Robert. After receiving the results of the examination, Brenda and James were officially recognized as suspects and declared wanted. On the run. Unfortunately, the fugitives were days ahead of police. Authorities alerted border officials that the suspects may have crossed the border. However, they were nowhere to be seen. After a while, it became clear that James and Brenda had fled the country. Police speculated that they were in Mexico. To catch the criminals, it was decided to block their accounts. Without their livelihood, they would sooner or later make themselves known, and so they did. 3 months later, Pavatt contacted his daughter. He asked her to send the money. Only one thing the man didn't take into account. The girl was cooperating with the investigation. Joanna had no doubts about her father's involvement in the crime. He was clearly hiding something from her. Even that time when he asked her boyfriend to call Mr. Andrew, pretending to be a doctor at the local hospital and report his wife's illness. Thanks to James's call, the investigation became aware that the perpetrators were hiding in the city of Cancun. In February 2002, James Pavatt and Brenda Andrew were apprehended at the border and handed over to the U.S. authorities. The two were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. Meanwhile, the Andrew couple's children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. After their arrest, none of the defendants were willing to cooperate with the investigation. They did not plead guilty, talking in the presence of lawyers. Trials. The first to stand before the court was James. The prosecution carefully built a case. It was reported that in the past, Pavatt was an army sniper and knew how to handle firearms. His scandalous affair and attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from stripping Brenda of her beneficiary status were also voiced. His daughter's testimony and the physical evidence that was found were taken into account. The jury found James Pavatt guilty and sentenced him to death. Next to go on trial was Brenda Andrew. While James's trial was methodical, building up into a clear portrait of motives, means, and execution, Brenda's trial was full of sordid details, revelations, and intrigue. The prosecution brought Brenda's personality and her string of infidelities to the forefront. Her former lovers were invited to the hearing. They characterized the woman as a person of far from faith and integrity. When the prosecutor asked Brenda why she killed her husband, she replied, "God knows that in my heart I am pure and innocent. If you are people of faith, set me free." The prosecutor disagreed. He presented her as a lecherous woman who did not love her husband, cheated on him, and then killed him for selfish purposes. To prove his point, he showed the contents of a suitcase she had taken with her to Mexico. It contained lacy lingerie as well as the book 203 Ways to Drive a Man Crazy in Bed. Would a grieving widow run away from her husband's funeral? The prosecutor asked the defendant. In turn, the defense team tried to portray Brenda as a victim of what happened. The defense attorney recalled that she was also injured in the attack. However, forensic experts said that the woman shot herself in the arm, to which the defense said that it possessed a letter with Pavatt's sole confession to the crimes committed. That would seem to be a valid argument. However, the handwriting expertise established that the document was forged by Brenda Andrew herself. However, the most shocking revelation was another. Pavatt's attorney stated that in the event of his ward's death, Brenda became the beneficiary of his insurance policy. In time, apparently, the same fate awaited him as Rob. Or maybe Brenda thought that she would be able to prove her innocence, and the punishment for the crime would fall on the shoulders of her lover. After the latter's death sentence, she'd be entitled to the insurance money too. The jury deliberated for about 6 hours. In the end, Brenda Andrew was found guilty of the crime charged and sentenced to death. Bottom line, both convicts are on death row awaiting execution. Brenda repeatedly appeals the judgment, but is unsuccessful. Pavatt's execution is scheduled for July 2024. It may be rescheduled again, as it has been done 4 times before. Brenda's execution date has not yet been set. She is the only woman sentenced to capital punishment in Oklahoma. The criminal intent of Brenda and James is horrific in and of itself. However, the fact that these men considered themselves God-fearing, teaching morality to children, further clouds the situation. People who preach things that do not guide their personal lives are unscrupulous and ruthless. You can expect anything from them because they are unfamiliar with moral principles. The discovery of Paige Bergfeld's car was the beginning of a mysterious story that began on the first Sunday of July 2007. On that day, a red Ford Focus that belonged to the missing Paige was discovered. However, the location where the car was found and its condition raised many questions and raised serious suspicions. The car was located in a remote area that Paige did not normally visit. Moreover, it was completely engulfed in flames of fire, suggesting that something terrible and strange had happened. The county district attorney of the county had been looking into what had happened with special scrutiny, and his preliminary findings indicated that the fire around the car was intentional. The conclusion was supported by the fact that nothing else had burned in the area. The unusual incident involving Paige Bergfeld's car was only the beginning of a much more complicated story. June 28, 2007 was a day that will always be remembered by Paige's family and friends. On this ordinary day, the young woman left her 3 children with friend Carol Linder home and left early in the morning. Nothing portended trouble, and no one could have imagined what would soon happen. Paige was a responsible mother and always called or came to pick up her children on time. Morning came, but Paige never returned to pick up her children. Attentive friends and relatives began trying to contact her, but all to no avail. 8-year-old Jez, the eldest of her children, took the initiative in searching for the missing woman. After sending several messages to her mom's phone and getting no response, she insisted on searching. With Carol, they went to the police station, where Jez reported that her mom had not returned for her. This call to the police was a key point in the beginning of the police investigation and search for Paige Bergfeld. With each passing hour, the concern of Paige's loved ones only grew. The community was shocked by this mysterious disappearance, and many were willing to make every effort to help in the search for Paige. Thus began a massive public search operation to return this young woman to her children and loved ones. That same day, the missing woman's father, Frank Bergfeld, received a disturbing call from an official with the sheriff's department. The message was brief and shocking. His daughter had disappeared. It became clear to Frank that something serious had happened. He tried to contact Paige, but there was no response. Terrified and desperate, Frank called his oldest son, Craig, who was on the other side of the country. Craig didn't hesitate to buy a one-way ticket and arrived in town, ready to help in the search for his sister. Family and loved ones joined forces with police and volunteers to begin a massive search. People from different neighborhoods began searching for Paige, combing the surrounding area, checking every corner where they could find any trace of her whereabouts. The police began scrutinizing Paige's history with her loved ones to see if they had anything to do with her disappearance. Of course, authorities turned their attention to Paige's relationship with her first husband, Howard Bigler. The story of that relationship began during her high school years. After graduating from high school, Paige enrolled in nursing school at the University of Florida, where she met a young man named Howard Bigler. Their feelings for each other proved to be mutual, and they began dating. After successfully earning her nursing degree, Paige returned to Colorado. There, she continued to live with her family, but after some time, in 1995, she and Howard Bigler got married. At first glance, the spouses seemed to be a happy couple. They had many common interests and views on life. However, there was one significant rift in their relationship that eventually led to divorce. Paige dreamed of a child and wanted a family, however, Howard did not share her desire. The issue became a cause for arguments and conversations on numerous occasions. None of the attempts to find a compromise was not successful, and in 1997 the couple decided to part ways. Nevertheless, despite the divorce, their connection was strong, and the former spouses remained friends. Paige later married Rob Dixon, but their marriage also ended in divorce. After her divorce from Rob, Paige resumed communication with Howard. The missing woman's first husband claimed that he was one of the last people to see Paige alive.
On the 28th, they met up in Eagle County, Colorado. It was due to personal business. There, they spent Thursday together. The former spouses then returned to their respective cities. Howard confirmed that they continued to communicate by phone after the meeting. Also, upon learning of Paige's disappearance, Howard immediately contacted emergency services. While speaking to the operator, he expressed his deep concern and belief that something terrible had happened to Paige. He noted that she would never leave her children without a good reason. The phone recording was corroborated by cell tower data, showing that on the day Paige disappeared, Howard was in the Denver, Colorado area, which is several hours away from where she disappeared. This gave police officers reason to remove Howard from the list of suspects. Police began to scrupulously examine Paige's relationship with her second husband, Rob Dixon, and quickly uncovered many events that raised questions and warranted further investigation. It turned out that during their marriage, Paige had reported Rob to the police twice for harassment. After her divorce from her first husband, Paige took a job at a strip club in Denver, where she met Rob Dixon. The man was a wealthy man who had inherited a large fortune through his family's business. Having fallen in love with each other, Paige and Rob did not hesitate, and in 1998 entered into marriage. The family settled in a luxurious home in Colorado, where Paige fulfilled her dream of becoming a mother. A few years later, the couple already had 3 children, which became for the young mom the most important thing in her life. The first years of marriage seemed happy. Paige and Rob were immersed in the world of luxury, leading a well-to-do lifestyle. Suddenly, however, things began to fall apart, and the reason for this was due to the financial difficulties Rob was facing. Some of his family's businesses had serious problems, and as a result, the economic situation in the family deteriorated so much that Rob was forced to file for bankruptcy. The financial collapse led to a deep family crisis. By 2004, family tensions had reached such a point that Paige contacted emergency services twice. The first time, she reported that Rob had threatened to kill her and the children, but by the time the police arrived, she and Rob claimed to have worked through their problems on their own. A year later, there was a second incident that was quite different. Paige reported Rob for assault while claiming that he hit her while she was holding her youngest child. This time, Rob was arrested and charged with third-degree assault. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of molestation, but the trial was dismissed and Rob avoided jail time. The relationship between husband and wife was getting worse, and they decided to separate, after which Rob moved to Pennsylvania. Investigators interviewed Rob in an attempt to establish his alibi for the day Paige disappeared. Rob claimed that he was in his home and could not have harmed her. Ruling out his involvement in the disappearance, investigators could not. Rob eventually joined the search and was very active in trying to find Paige. Investigating officers spared no effort in an effort to find any clues to unravel this mysterious story and track down the missing mother. One of the first steps was a thorough examination of Paige's car. Based on the assumption that evidence could be found in the car that would help locate the woman, or at least understand what happened to her. Sergeant Weiler of the County Sheriff's Department said that arson is often used to destroy potential evidence. However, an examination of the vehicle provided experts with very valuable information. The driver's seat had been pushed back as far as it would go, indicating that the last person to drive the Ford was a tall man. Paige was short and couldn't have reached the pedals from that distance. In the trunk of the car, they found the missing woman's notebook, from which pages from June 26th through June 29th had been torn out. With each passing hour, the search for Paige grew more desperate. A few days after the burning car was discovered, a random driver stopped on a highway southeast of town for tire problems. A checkbook lying nearby caught his eye, and he immediately reported it to the authorities. While investigating that stretch of road, medical records, insurance cards, and other items belonging to Paige were also found. Sergeant Weiler discovered that several pages in the checkbook had been torn out, and the items were scattered a considerable distance apart. Most significant, however, was a business card found on the road. It became the key to revisiting the investigation. It turned out that Paige led a secret life that her loved ones had no idea about. According to the business card, the woman was an escort under the alias Carrie. This discovery called into question all previous assumptions in the investigation of Paige Bergfeld's disappearance. From that moment on, police officers were faced with new circumstances they had not even realized. After her divorce, Paige realized that from now on, she would have to work and earn as much as she could to provide for her children and meet their needs. She took a determined approach and started her own children's clothing business. At the same time, she taught dance lessons and sold kitchen supplies at a company. Despite her busy schedule, Paige always made time for her children, attended parent-teacher association meetings, and was active in school groups. A new discovery by the police turned the previous picture upside down. It turned out that Paige led a completely secretive life. She had a separate phone at her disposal, which she used for calls related to her professional activities. This phone became the key to unraveling a mystery that was far more complicated than even Paige's close friends and family could have imagined. Investigators' questions only multiplied. Why did such a conscientious mother and successful businesswoman decide to lead a double life? What did this secret profession have to do with her disappearance? All these questions became a priority in the investigation and added a new mystery to the investigation. Using a cell phone found in Paige's car, detectives accessed a list of contacts and calls made and received in the hours before the young woman's disappearance. The last call from that phone was made on June 28th at approximately 9 p.m. As a result of analyzing this information, 7 people were identified as suspects, and one of them was Lester Ralph Jones. Lester Jones's criminal history drew particular attention from investigators. He had a history of violence against a woman and kidnapping on his record. For the latter incident, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, that was not the only thing that alerted the police. His car was white in color, and from the external description was very similar to the car seen by Carol, Paige's friend. Carol shared important information with the detectives. She recounted an incident where Paige approached her car one day and saw another white car nearby that was blocking her driveway. Outraged, she got behind the wheel to turn around and drive away, but the cars collided, except that the unknown driver immediately fled the scene. With this information, investigators speculated that Lester may have been obsessed with Paige and following her. Further investigation revealed that Lester Jones attempted to make an appointment with Paige for intimate services the day before she disappeared. Lester was questioned and denied having any information about Paige's disappearance. He provided fingerprints and DNA samples. However, many suspicious items were found in Lester's home, including a disposable cell phone, men's wigs, Viagra,
a sheet with the phone number of an escort service, and women's lingerie in various sizes. The disposable cell phone attracted particular attention from investigators. Analysis of call records on Paige's cell phone showed that on the day of her disappearance, someone tried to contact her several times from an unregistered number. Lester denied under questioning that he had a second cell phone. This meant he lied to the police. Using the packaging found at Lester's home, police were able to determine that the phone had nevertheless been purchased at a supermarket on North Avenue. Video footage from the store identified Lester as the purchaser. When he was shown the video footage, he refused to acknowledge that it depicted him. As a result of all this, Lester Jones became the prime suspect in Paige's disappearance. With no concrete evidence pointing to his guilt, the police continued to follow him and attempted to find Paige's body in order to have enough evidence to press charges. Case was put on hold for several years, and all the while, the young woman's family and loved ones were at a loss for grief. No one knew what had happened to the young mother, and the search seemed hopeless. As time went on, the hope that Paige would be found alive was dwindling. That all changed in 2012, when a hiker accidentally stumbled upon human remains in a ravine among rocks and bushes in Delta County. The find was discovered very close to the road where Paige's personal belongings had been found 5 years earlier. Experts who arrived on the scene were almost certain that it was the body of a young mother. The experts ran a DNA test, and the results confirmed that it was Paige. She was found, but it was a grisly end to her story. The exact cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the body, but it was found that Paige had been struck many times as several of her bones were broken, particularly the bones in her face. As a result, it was determined that she died from injuries sustained during the beating. This information added to the horrific drama of the story. Paige's body was underground, and due to years of soil erosion, ended up on the surface. This may explain why she was not discovered earlier. Lester Ralph Jones's case came to a halt for several years after Paige's remains were discovered. In November 2014, he was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and second-degree murder. However, the trial didn't begin until July 2016 and lasted 22 days. Prosecutors argued that Lester, who already had a history of violence against women, was frustrated at not being able to see Paige after trying to get an appointment with her. The main witness for the prosecution was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa. She recounted how the man kidnapped her and threatened to kill her at gunpoint in the late 1990s. According to Lisa, Lester could not reconcile with her decision to break up with him. On one occasion, he attacked the couple with a gun in his hands, and Lisa's partner was shot in the head. A month later, Lester threatened her again, telling her that she would now end up at the bottom of a lake. However, the woman managed to escape and contacted police, leading to Lester's arrest on kidnapping and assault charges. Lester's defense attorneys tried to argue that the police detained an innocent man and suggested that Paige's other potential clients may have also had a motive for the crime. However, they did not present convincing evidence linking other individuals to the murder. Lester's current spouse also appeared before the jury and argued that although he used an escort service, she did not abandon her husband because of her faith. However, she did not provide him with an alibi and identified him from a surveillance video at a supermarket where Lester was buying a disposable phone. On September 9, 2016, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and the first trial was declared a mistrial. However, the district attorney was convinced of Lester's guilt and wasn't about to give up. Over the next few days, he worked diligently on the investigation and re-examined all the evidence. On November 21, 2016, after reviewing the evidence, the jury finally reached a verdict. Lester was found guilty of all charges in connection with Paige's death. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The defense appealed the sentence, but in June 2022, an appeals court panel upheld the sentence and affirmed Lester's guilt. Paige's final farewell was held on April 28, 2012. Her obituary dedicated beautiful words to her, describing her as a beautiful and radiant woman whose smile could be compared to the sun. Her tragic loss has left its mark on the hearts of her family and friends. Her 3 children were orphaned and had to endure the loss of their mother, who had always been their support and encouragement. Page's case attracted public attention and dragged on for many years, but still the persistence and perseverance of relatives and law enforcement finally brought justice. Lester Ralph Jones was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now he will no longer be able to harm other people. Page's story serves as a reminder of the importance of endeavoring to fight for justice, even if it takes a lot of time and effort. Her memory will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories on around the world ahead. After horrific events disrupted the quiet and unhurried lives of the residents of the tiny town of Maymay in the southern Philippines, Lavella Magod finally received permission from law enforcement to clean her own home, which had been the scene of a terrible crime. As she wiped down the surfaces, she reflected on the fact that not long ago, these rooms were filled with prosperity, stability, laughter, and warmth. And then, someone ruthless had cruelly and inhumanely taken the lives of her 2 children, after which the shadow of tragedy had consumed all familiar life. It wasn't easy for Lavelle to touch the pieces of furniture that still held the memories of her children, but cleaning distracted her from the heavy emotions, creating a temporary sense of control at least over the order of the house, and she found in this control a temporary refuge from the emotional pain, because she also has an adopted daughter, Janice, who miraculously managed to survive the terrible massacre and for whom she must remain strong. In recent days, the grieving mother could only cry, scream, curl up in a ball, and for long hours went deep into herself, although she realized how hard it must be for Janice, who was the only witness to the crime. Reaching her foster daughter's room, Lavella concentrated especially on cleaning. Suddenly, she found an ID card that definitely shouldn't have been in the girl's room. The ID belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Merlin. Lavella immediately went to the police station to report the find. The ID probably belongs to one of the 3 burglars that Janice had previously reported, she said. The police officers listened carefully to the woman, and the ID did indeed go a long way toward bringing the crime closer to being solved. However, they were not at all surprised, as by this point they were pretty sure who, how, and why killed Gwen and Louis Magud on December 10, 2021. On September 22, 2013, long before the events at the Magod's home, a 9-year-old girl, unable to bear the lack of parental love, care, poverty, beatings, and physical hunger, stood on the dock and stared hopelessly into the water. A lonely, quiet child caught the attention of a woman passing by. When asked what she was doing here alone and if she needed help, the girl looked up and quietly replied, "My name is Janice Sabil. I have no parents, and for some reason I don't remember anything." The woman decided that the child had suffered some kind of shock that caused her memory loss. Perhaps something terrible had happened to her. The woman took the girl to the nearest police station, where she was assured that the child would be taken care of. Janice was placed in temporary custody, and they tried to find her parents. Time passed. The search yielded nothing. The girl did not remember anything about her life. No one ever reported the child missing, and after a while the girl was officially recognized as an orphan, transferred to the permanent care of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, which, in general, did not sadden the child at all. For the first time, she had plenty of food, clothes, and a lot of friendly attention from adults. As it turned out, Janice did not lose her memory, but the defense mechanisms of the child's consciousness, having experienced so many traumatic events, pushed away the memories of family and home. Being an orphan meant staying in a new and better life. That's what she did. Even then, Janice had her first, not yet fully realized, experience of how to behave so that others would want to help you. Unfortunately, the events of 2013 were not a one-time ticket to a new life, but a mechanism for getting what she wanted. Cruz and Lavelle Magud were known to others as a well-meaning married couple. Cruz worked as a teacher at the local high school, while his wife ran an elementary school. The couple raised 2 wonderful children. Incredibly intelligent, 18-year-old Beauty Gwen participated in all extracurricular activities and was a member of the Girl Scouts. The girl dreamed of a career as a doctor and even, wanting to test herself, enrolled in her last year of high school in a preparatory medical school. 16-year-old Louis became the soul of any company in which he came. He easily made friends, was open, played guitar, sang, and painted. At all, this young man showed extreme responsibility, liked to help everyone, and planned to achieve success in law. Parents were proud of their children, helped them in everything, and supported their plans and desires. The family led a measured life, attended church, and did charity work. At one of the charity events in the church, Gwen and met Janice, where she came as a nanny to look after the children. The girls became instant friends and became best friends overnight. Almost the same age, they were fun and funky. They often posted dance videos on TikTok and came up with interesting ways to spend their time. Louise enjoyed participating in their activities. It didn't take long for all three of them to become best friends. At one point, her brother and sister wondered why Janice was working instead of attending school, and Janice told them that she was an orphan. Her parents died of illness when she was very young, so she has had to rely solely on government assistance since she was a child. In order to be able to buy something for herself, she has to work part-time instead of studying. The girl complained that the couple who gave her a job pays very little, and the money received is enough only for food, and she has to work almost around the clock. Later, Janice repeatedly shared her fears about the future with her new friends. Since she is about to turn 18, she is about to lose some social benefits, intended only for minors, and perhaps she will not even have anything to pay for housing. Education and a good career are all but forgotten. Kind-hearted Gwen, heartened by her friend's plight, decided to lend her a helping hand and went to her parents. She told them about the difficult, tragic life of a new acquaintance and asked them to adopt Janice so that she had a roof over her head and conditions for studying. She assured the parents that everyone would benefit. Janice would be able to get an education, help share the housework, and help Louis with his homework. The Magads were skeptical at first. They worked as teachers, their income was low, they could hardly afford another child, and besides, there was no extra room in their house for Janice. Louis even volunteered to sleep on the living room couch and gave up his room. The parents couldn't stand their daughter and son's repeated requests and agreed. In July 2021, the Magads officially adopted Janice. They enrolled her in school, and she even took their last name. Janice turned out to be a smart and very polite girl. She accepted all the rules in the house. Cruz and Lavella wanted their children to grow up to be responsible and disciplined people who would know the value of work and money, and so they introduced them to the household. Janice was given exactly the same amount of housework as her sister and brother. The girl gladly performed her share of the duties and always showed respect for her foster parents. To show her gratitude to the family, she would sometimes get up early and cook breakfast for everyone. The couple realized that they had not just helped the girl, as Gwen had asked them to do, but had indeed unexpectedly gained a second daughter, albeit a very old one. At one point, Janice even called them Mom and Dad. On December 10, 2021, at 2:58 in the afternoon, Cruz, who was checking his middle school homework, received a phone call from a neighbor who hurriedly told him, "Go home soon, but don't panic before time." Janice left a strange post on Facebook. "Your house appears to have been burglarized." Cruz immediately put work on hold, called his wife, who was also at work at that moment, and rushed home. On the way, he tried to call his children, but they didn't answer. The worried father drove home at top speed, more worried about the safety of his children than the money in the house. At about 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz pulled up to the house. The door to the house appeared to be locked, so he went to the back door, walked around the house, and entered through a second entrance. Everywhere was a mess. Cruz went from room to room and called the kids by name. When he reached the living room, he saw something no parent should ever see. Luis and Gwen were lying on the floor covered in blood. Luis lay in the living room with his hands tied behind his back, a towel stuffed in his mouth and scars all over his body. He found his eldest daughter, Gwen, not far from the bedroom door, her entire body covered in cuts and blood. They were most definitely dead. With a noise in his head, on absorbent cotton legs, Cruz suddenly realized that there had to be a third person in the house. He started screaming as hard as he could, "Janice! Janice!" At one point, Cruz heard a quiet voice say, "Daddy!" Turning around, Cruz was relieved to see that Janice was alive, hugged her, and noticed that her hair was wet. He asked why it was wet, and the girl replied that she had just gotten out of the shower and therefore, because of the water, did not hear his call. Of course, her grief-stricken father thought her answer was strange, but he decided that Janice wanted to wash away the horror she had experienced. After all, many people in shocking situations begin to behave strangely. After making sure she was unharmed, the man called the police. Police arriving on the scene found a hammer, a baseball bat, a knife, and a broken wine bottle near the victims. Under normal circumstances, having more than one means of committing a crime means there is more than one perpetrator. The police turned all of these items over to the appropriate officers, hoping to find fingerprints on them, and proceeded to search the house and collect evidence near and around it. They also advised Cruz and Lavelle to carefully examine the items to see what was missing. Very carefully, the officers conducted a detailed interview with Janice, the only survivor. She told them that she and Gwen were in the room, and Louis was in the living room when they heard screaming and the sounds of a fight. She and Gwen immediately went to check what had happened and saw two masked robbers hitting Luis with a hammer and a baseball bat, and a third man with a knife. Terrified at what they saw, they gave themselves away with a muffled shriek. One of the thugs chased after Gwen. According to Janice, he didn't notice her. She took advantage of the moment, ran into the small bedroom, locked the door, and hid under the bed. There she lay in shock, not daring to move. When she came to her senses, she sent a text message asking for help to her mother Lavelle, but her mother did not answer. She was afraid to call the police to avoid giving herself away by ringing or the sound of her voice, so 12 minutes after texting her mom, she wrote 2 messages for help on her Facebook page. "Help. There are strangers in my house. I can only hide in my room right now. I don't want to die." One of those messages was seen by a neighbor who called Cruz. 3 days after the terrible event which struck all residents of the town with its unbearable cruelty, the Philippine police created a special investigative team, including the best staff and specialists. On December 15th, the investigation team said that a large amount of evidence and clues have been collected, and the nature of the case is temporarily classified as robbery and murder. But they do not rule out other versions and will conduct an in-depth investigation. By other theories, the investigation team members meant their growing belief that Janice was the key figure in the crime. Specialists compared evidence from the crime scene and witness statements with Janice's and found several very large discrepancies that allowed them to list the girl as a suspect rather than a witness. First, nothing was missing from the house, which seemed illogical if the 3 bandits were planning a robbery. Cruz and Lavella said that all the valuables and money were in place, despite the fact that the house was turned upside down. Only Gwen's cell phone was missing. Second, the investigation team found a plastic bag containing bloody pants and shirt in a creek near Cruz's home. It was confirmed that the bloodstains on the clothes belonged to the murdered men. It appeared that the perpetrator, or one of the perpetrators, changed into clean clothes after the murder and then fled. That is, he was unusually calm after committing the crime, indicating premeditation and planning. In a robbery that went wrong and ended in multiple murders, the perpetrator would likely have panicked and tried to get away as quickly as possible, rather than waste time searching for clean clothes and changing clothes, especially since the parents of the murdered men did not confirm that any articles of clothing were missing. And it is highly unlikely that the perpetrator would have thrown the bloody clothes into the stream behind the house. Moreover, there were signs at the scene that indicated an emotional crime, not a cold-blooded one. There were too many wounds and fractures found on the bodies of the brother and sister. Gwen even had one ear torn off. Most of the injuries were to her face. The autopsy took 2 full days. Such a scene seems more like anger venting for revenge or jealousy, rather than calculation. The perpetrator was clearly very angry. The nature of the crime clearly indicated a personal grudge killing. Third, according to the forensic medical report, the older sister died before the younger brother, which contradicted Janice's testimony, because according to her, the younger brother was attacked first, and with as many wounds as Janice described, it was unlikely that he could have outlived his sister, who had been bleeding for quite some time. Fourthly, the murder weapons were the property of the family. The perpetrators did not bring them with them. The hammer belonged to the head of the family, and he kept it in the laundry room drawer. Cruz was sure that only his eldest daughters Gwen and Janice knew where the hammer was kept. A baseball bat found at the scene, according to the parents' testimony, belonged to their youngest son, who kept it on the second tier of the bed, under a blanket. Burglars who are suddenly caught in the act don't run around the house looking for a hammer and bat, stored in non-obvious places. They either bring their own murder weapons or use available items. It turns out, the location of the two key tools of this crime were known only to the people living in the house. Cruz and Lavelle have alibis. That leaves Janice, who knew where the hammer and baseball bat were kept. Louis gave her his room, so she was aware of the strange location of the item. So even if she wasn't the killer, she was probably an accomplice, since the perpetrator wasn't alone. Fifth, when Lavella received a text message from Janice asking for help, she immediately called back, but Janice did not answer and later said that after not receiving a response from her mother, she published a Facebook post. Dispatch data confirmed Lavelle's call. The Facebook post, quite long and with emoticons, somehow did not fit with the behavior of a person afraid to even move. Sixth, shock and panic could not explain taking a shower instead of calling the police. A person is usually most vulnerable in the shower, plus the water muffles the sounds of approaching footsteps. So why did Janice shower and wash her hair while she claimed she was afraid of the three unknown men, since they might not have left? If Janice had no doubt that the burglars were already gone and wasn't afraid to give herself away by making noises, then why didn't she call the police before taking a shower? Well, and most importantly, the autopsy revealed that Gwen and Louis passed away around 2 p.m., which meant Janice waited about 48 minutes to start texting her foster mom and waited an hour to post on Facebook. The room she hid in was ransacked. It seemed the perpetrators had scrutinized every corner of the small room, but hadn't noticed Janice. How could that be? By the time Lavelle entered the police station with Merlin's ID, the investigation team had already received the lab report. Janice's fingerprints had been found on the hammer and baseball bat used as the murder weapons. Of course, the implements could have had the prints of the people living in the house, but given the other inconsistencies, she was the prime suspect. Janice was brought to the station for formal questioning on December 18th. She was told about the ID she had found, the results of the forensic examination, and all the inconsistencies. Unexpectedly for the detectives, Janice immediately confessed to the crime. She revealed that she and Merlin had killed Gwen and Louise. Shortly after the confession, Janice and Merlin were arrested. Gwen's cell phone, the only missing item from the crime scene, was found in the young man's belongings. Both young men were charged with first-degree murder and sent to juvenile detention without bail. It is still unknown how Janice and Merlin met and what their relationship was. It is only known that Merlin was the same age as the girl and worked in the church, preparing everything necessary for church services. The young people were friends on Facebook. Having studied their correspondence, investigators learned that they planned to kill Gwen and Louise since December 1st. That is, 10 days before the tragedy. Cruz and Lavella were distraught and could hardly believe what was happening. Janice had always seemed so quiet and well-mannered. They kindly took her in and treated her like their own daughter, and their children loved the girl like a sister. Why? Why did she do such a thing? Why? Janice attributed it to envy of Gwen. A well-to-do family, loving parents, she resented why she never got what Gwen got effortlessly. In her opinion, the adoption was nothing more than cheap sympathy and a way for family members to validate themselves at the expense of her difficult life. I felt like a stray dog that had been picked up. If the Magods had known how Janice really felt, they would have tried to help her understand, but they didn't. Janice skillfully hid everything behind niceness, and she didn't make breakfast out of gratitude, but felt obliged to do so. Janice was very angry about all the housework the Magods made her do, believing them to be hypocrites and treating her like a servant rather than a daughter. As soon as the news of Janice's confession became known, there was an uproar in the town. All the residents could not believe that a 17-year-old orphan girl had committed such a brutal crime. People began to compare her to the heroine of the movie Orphan, because of which the number of adoptions had already dropped once. As the uproar continued to grow, the investigative team looked into Janice's past and found her mother and 2 younger brothers. Turns out, Janice wasn't an orphan. When she was very young, her family lived in great poverty. Her father gambled and spent all the family money on gambling. The family was almost constantly starving. In 2013, the girl ran away from home. Standing on that pier, she accepted the help of a concerned woman out of desperation. Having received food, care, and warmth, almost for the first time in her life, she realized that the best solution would be never to remember her parents and brothers again. Her family wasn't looking for her. The lack of an extra mouth only made their lives easier, and there was no money for searching. Perhaps her mother secretly hoped that her daughter was in better circumstances. Since then, Janice realized that pretending to be an orphan is profitable, so you can get sympathy, food, and clothes instead of hunger and beatings, and she can hardly be blamed for that conclusion. Since discovering the truth about the difficult childhood, the motive has become clearer. No one could have imagined the extent to which a traumatized and possibly mentally unstable child would be adopted by the Magad family. In telling Gwen about her difficult life and the imminent lack of payments and housing, Janice had absolutely counted on an invitation to stay at her friend's house. She was used to playing on sympathy, was ready to pay for cleaning and looking after Louis, but the girl hardly expected that the Magad family would go so far as to adopt. It opened up numerous childhood traumas. All her time in the Magad family had been spent observing the normal lives of other children, longing for such a life, feeling her own inferiority, abandonment, and carefully constructed psychological defense mechanisms. She was used to surviving and knew well how to do it. And suddenly, she had it all. Everything she'd ever dreamed of. Having never seen enough care and love from her relatives, she didn't know how to accept such care and didn't understand how one could feel well-being. In her new family, it became difficult for her to accept kindness as something natural. She was constantly looking for a catch. She experienced the usual fear for the future but did not find it reflected in reality. The care and love her adopted daughter received was filtered through her own experiences and emotional wounds. Instead of reassurance, Janice felt tension. She didn't know how to be a daughter, but she knew how to be a hired worker. With the allotted amount of tasks, she explained to herself what was happening. What this house really wanted was a free worker, not a daughter. Everyone was just playing noble and reveling in their charity. Tension began to turn into hatred and a desire for revenge for being treated like a picked-up stray dog. The better the family treated Janice, the more resentment grew in her heart of hearts. She felt like a stranger and was jealous of Lavelle and Gwen. The more love Lavella showed her daughters, the more jealousy Janice felt. Unable to deal with such emotions, love and care turned into a source of fear and hatred. She experienced rage and frustration, feeling even more inferior and misunderstood. This distorted perception became a breeding ground for a desire for revenge against those who she felt had simply taken advantage of her trust. Numerous studies of child psychology emphasize the importance of psychological support for children who have experienced difficult periods and emotional trauma, especially in the adoption process. But unfortunately, no one guessed about Janice's past and the emotional traumas she had experienced. The desire to help the orphaned girl turned into a nightmare for the Magud family, ruthless and irreparable. Gwen and Louise were buried in a private cemetery on December 20th, 2021. More than 1,000 people attended the funeral and all expressed their grief. Janice and Merlin were tried separately, but the young men received identical sentences, 32 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When they get out of prison, they will be in their 50s and still have a whole life ahead of them that Gwen, Louise, Cruz, and Lavelle will now not have. A horrific crime has shattered the Magad family forever. Their act of kindness has been rewarded in the most horrific way imaginable. After surviving the horror, it's very difficult to remain kind and strong, but Cruz and Lavella succeeded. In August 2022, the couple opened a restaurant in honor of their fallen children that serves their favorite dishes. The couple are undergoing psychotherapy and plan to use their business to keep the memory of Gwen and Louise alive.